Okay, ripping. Elmo, Dennis, the professional. Thanks, dog.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm psyched. So I'm getting a bunch of questions from the Gristle Crew about 5G. I've just done my first two installs. One was indoor, one was outdoor. And as happens when you do your first of anything, you learn a boatload.
Yep.
But it opens up even more questions. And so I'd ask the crew for questions, and then I've got a bunch of my own. I thought we'd start with kind of some big picture stuff that may or may not be within your wheelhouse. Is one of the questions about, is high band the accepted term for millimeter wave of 22 to 28 gigahertz? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's typically on the higher end scale. So yeah, but we can't compare it to that. Unfortunately, it's our side is more mid band, so we're 3.55, I think it is, to 3.75 or something like that. Okay.
Yep. And I think that's a part of it, is that there's this whole new vocabulary and a set of numbers that we all have to learn, just like we'll learn 915 or 902, 928, all that stuff in LoRa. Now it's 3.55 to 3.7. It's gigahertz, not megahertz, bunch of stuff. One of the things is private CBRS. And if I'm understanding it right, private CBRS is the term for a company that's providing indoor coverage to like a large mall, or no?
No. So a private network is the best way. When I made my little video showcasing, talking about how to do like outdoor locations, I kind of talked about it like a router, like your regular Wi-Fi router.
Okay.
So you have your router at home, and only the people that you've given the SSID and the name of the account or the Wi-Fi and then the password.
Yep.
If their phone comes, or whatever device comes into your signal, they can connect to it. But your neighbor, everybody else can't connect to it. So it's private. Okay. So that's kind of what it is. So with a private network, even a CBRS, instead of it being on Wi-Fi, what it is, it's on cellular. So for example, like for this phone, it has see if I can pull it up perfectly. At the bottom, I don't know if anybody can see it. It says
fuzzy. We'll get it.
Okay. Yeah, but it says Freedom Fi. So I'm connected to my little radio that's off to my right, and only I'm able to connect to it.
Okay. All right, pretty straightforward. So the private stuff and a private CBRS is what I guess we're all running right now with Helium, if I'm understanding that right. Is that only the people who have an eSIM on Freedom Fi or who have a Freedom Fi SIM can use it?
Correct. So it goes a little bit. So yeah, it's a Helium private network, not just my. If I had the SIM that was only connected to my radio, but with a Helium SIM, like our Helium network, if I found another radio that happens to be, let's say a mile away, and I go near it, my phone will connect to that network. So any radio we can technically connect to.
Right. Okay. Cool. And let's see. One of the things, I'm jumping around a little bit here. One of the things I've seen just watching you work in the 5G CBRS channel on Helium is you basically have to have an Android phone if you want to do any kind of like cheap kind of checking things out. You could spend 30,000 on a spectrum analyzer if you want to.
Yeah.
But you can just get an Android phone, and that's got all the apps that we need in order to kind of map out coverage.
So unfortunately, Apple kind of likes to keep everything locked within their ecosystem. So you're not really able to see what they call like your signal strength. There is ways to see it, but it kind of gets into more advanced. Like with an Android, this app right here is called Cell Network Info. Yeah, and so it's a cheap app, $3, and it tells you your signal strength, any of the other radios that are around you, Wi-Fi down here. You can do speed tests and stuff like that. So Android gives you a little bit more flexibility, and a phone like this, I think I paid $120 for the S10, and then I got the Freedom 5 SIM card, which you can get 3 for $100.
Okay, and then it's the Galaxy S10, is that right? And if I'm also remembering correctly, that the phone has to have, is it channel 48 or band 48? It's something 48 capability in order to do that.
So band 48. So the S10 are newer, like the Galaxy line. So S10, S20, S21, 22, they all have that ability. Then there's Pixel 4 or newer that has band 48, and then iPhone 11, 12, 13, all the newer ones, and the SC Generation 3. So that also has band 48.
Cool. So the iPhones can use it. We just can't use them to see what we want to see.
Correct. So you're not able to see those numbers, but iPhone personally, not just personally, but it has a lot better handoffs to radios, to the CBRS radios, than Android does. So there is a trade-off. You'll get better performance on our radios with an iPhone, but you'll get,
okay,
pros and cons.
Cool. So I'm thinking about it this way then, is that if you want to use the network, you're going to use an iPhone. If you want to test the network, you're going to use an Android.
Yeah, you can yeah. You're gonna get easier handoffs. The iPhones just their modems.
Cool.
iPhones have been, Apple has been around with CBRS. They actually do think it's good, and so they've been really, pushing forward for it. Yeah.
Okay. Into their plan. Dig it. Speaking of that, do you think majors will pursue midband, which is this 3.55 gig for a long time, and abandon plans for millimeter wave coverage? Because if they do, that hurts our market opportunities.
Yeah. So the thing is, if we look at the spectrum that we are allotted, so we're allotted 150 millimeters. 150 megahertz of spectrum, right?
Yep.
Each carrier pretty much has their own 150 megahertz, but within, plus or minus whatever amount they have, how much they purchased.
Yep.
But for themselves, that's how much they have. So they have them in different spectrums. They have them in like low 600s for T-Mobile. They have 3.5, of course, and then 12 and all the other high end, millimeter wave spectrums.
Yep. Okay. And then let's see, I'll jump again. If we're talking about them in the CBRS, so there are three kind of tiers in CBRS. There's the incumbent tier, which is basically the government. In my case, not my case, and everyone in San Diego's case, the Navy, which is using it for radar, and they get priority access over everyone. And then the second tier down is the, confusingly, priority access list, I think, the PAL.
License. Yeah.
License.
So, yeah.
And is the PAL, the priority access license, is that what kind of Verizon and T-Mobile and the rest of them are buying, or is that to someone else?
No, that's exactly what Dish, Verizon, T-Mobile buys. So pretty much, it doesn't protect them from incumbents, tier one, the government, fixed wireless access, fixed access,
satellite stuff, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple other stuff in there, and so it doesn't protect them from that, but it protects them from us, which are tier 3 general access. So. We'll get to that, but that's kind of a con if something happens to where, if we look at like LA or New York and you have 30, 40 hotspots per hex.
Res 8 hex, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. So, and then if you look around it, you have a lot of them are double digits in LA. Then what goes with New York, you're going to have start reaching limits with how much available spectrum is in that area. So we kind of are fearing that with Pollen, with Helium, with all these other companies that are pushing CBRS, because there are companies that are professional, like the company Solana. Mm-hmm. They're pretty much, they're known, the top dog in CBRS and deploying. So
and that's spelled CELONA. That is not the same as the Solana blockchain.
Not the crypto. So, but yeah, they're known. They're pretty much the top dog in deploying CBRS. So, we got competition. So now I think those companies are going to have to start pooling, PALs to have an X amount of spectrum that is allotted to them because they have a license. But that removes that 40 megahertz in that little pocket that they have. It removes it from us. So one con and later on down the line is people are going to start getting kicked off the spectrum because there's none available.
Right. So we're going to get squeezed out, basically.
Right.
Over time. How long do you think that'll take? Do you think that's kind of months, years, decades? Just a guess? Or unknown?
It's kind of unknown because 110 or even 150, whatever we have available, is a lot of spectrum. That's pretty much what, like I was mentioning earlier, that entire spectrum is available to what like AT&T has. I think they have like 110 megahertz. So it's a lot of spectrum, but like I was mentioning, we do have a lot of other companies that are, doing the same thing. So we do have a lot of competition. And if you haven't seen how much spectrum Dish has bought, it's pretty much a lot. So Dish, which is, a big player with helium and pollen, they can pull their licenses. So it kind of might hurt us. They can actually,
Right.
be like, okay, we got a license, we're in this area, we need this spectrum.
Right. It's interesting because the guy who runs it, Charlie Ergen, is no dummy by a long shot. He didn't get to be a billionaire by making stupid decisions. So it's one of those things where I think of it, it's both kind of promising, it's cool, and it's also a little bit scary. It's like, oh, they're opening it up, but they can also close it back down.
One of my fears, now this is speculation, please don't hate me, Dish, for this, but like one of my fears is, a company like Dish with having an Explorer, or even like any of the other companies, like you can see where areas are like, for example, let's say I live in Dallas, Texas. Let's say that Dallas, Texas, they see that it's one of the highest earners. So one of those companies can be like, well, we're kind of tired of not paying helium or these other cryptos. And so they can put their own towers kind of wiping out, because they see like, why am I going to pay these guys when,
I could
we
keep
can
it all myself. So I guess it just comes down to kind of deployment costs and the rest of it.
correct. So that's one fear we do have. So like, when I say us, I'm talking about I have a DM with people that are from the industry, this telco industries, and it's kind of things that we've been talking about since the beginning of 5G. It's like we're pretty much opening up not an open source, but like we're giving them a map to show, hey, this is where a lot of the rewards are. This is where we think that you're underserved. And so I'm hoping Dish plays nice, because we can help them. And one thing that I proposed to Freedom Fi was put a bounty. So how in the HIPs they were giving 20% to the service provider. If Dish Network says, hey, look, we need St. Louis, Missouri. I'm
Yeah,
just
we need coverage in this area. Yep.
Yeah, so like St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, we need coverage out there. Here's the PAL license. You guys now have extra like
Oh, wow.
spectrum.
Okay.
It's
Should be
our,
cool for Dish because then they give us our license. They can, yeah, I can see that. That's super smart.
yeah, and so I'm willing to give them a little bit extra out of the reward, because then we're guaranteed that 40 megahertz in that area. So Pollen and other people, as long as they don't have that license, they're not kicking us off.
Right. We step up in priority level and step down in slight rewards level would be the general idea.
Correct.
Okay.
But you don't get shut down, so I'd rather have that.
Yeah. You'd rather have less of something than none of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's then talk about kind of what are the specific things that are, or the specific locations that are most likely to get us rewards and also stay protected. And I'm thinking of this, maybe I'm thinking too small, but I'm thinking of this as like, where can we take small nibbles that are too small for a telco to care about, but that are big enough to pay the rent, pay the bills. What do you think is the smallest, if we're talking about indoor, what's the smallest space that a CBRS kind of could, or a radio could be in?
So I kind of I might be stepping on some people's toes here, because I'm giving out what they're looking for.
Sure.
But let's say, for example, like New York, there's nothing that, because there's let me step back just a little bit to kind of fill in your people to understand. There is spectrum in A, B, and then hopefully another spectrum is going to be called category C. So you got category A, B, and C. Category A is all inside, and that has its own spectrum allotment. Then you have category B, which has its own spectrum allotment, and then category C, which is being proposed, and it just means higher, like higher wattage radios and stuff. Because right now you can use pretty much 5 watts, and like a 18 dB antenna will push you over that EIRP limit. So a lot of these companies like the big carriers that spent the billions of dollars to get these licenses, for them, they're using 20-watt radios with 13 dBi antennas, so they're way above the EIRP, so they're kind of not liking that. So um, so with that being said, we have these small allotments. If you look at like um, New York, for example, let's take a city. Rather than deploying just outside and having, on top of like a skyscraper or something like that, there's a lot of like these little bars that are sitting underground.
Yeah.
Those are perfect spots because I've seen people send me, pictures like, hey, what do you think of this spot? And you see people out the door because it's a soccer game or whatever sporting event, and there's a bunch of people with zero coverage because it's underground.
Yep.
So something like that is perfect when a carrier comes on and we move data.
Okay.
So,
And so then it also makes it, I mean, it's hard. And I've not obviously, I think I've made a mistake with this outdoor deployment that I recently did, because if I'm understanding it right, almost any outdoor deployment is going to be better served by a large telco who can put up a bigger radio that has better coverage. And really any outdoor deployment that's in an urban area is probably going to be better served by a big telco.
yes and no. So yeah, like if that area, it all depends on topography as well. But like if in like a suburbs like where I'm at right now, there's a 500-foot antenna right behind me, and yeah, it's blasting for miles, and then they're filling in like dead spots around the freeway and stuff like that. So yeah, and something like that you can, but where you have your outdoor radio, it is filling in, it's filled in by buildings and a tall, they're not super high rise, but they're pretty tall. So yeah, something like that you can actually get away with. But if your radio is trying to overpower, Verizon's that's, maybe 300 feet away from you, you probably are, you're well suited to maybe go move your radio to find like a dead spot.
Yeah. Okay. So finding dead spots is really the name of the game.
And that's why this mapper is such a big thing, because you'll be able to see like I don't know if you've seen it, but to the people that have not, you're able to scan. It doesn't connect to a radio. So for example, let's say hypothetically,
when you're talking about the mapper, is that this helium mapper, this 5G that they're starting to send out? Yep. Okay.
Yes, sir. So like, let's just hypothetically say this phone was a mapper, right?
Yep.
Instead of connecting to a radio and like latching on like you would a Wi-Fi, what it does is it just scans the area and it tells you, okay, Verizon is at this decibels at this moment. Let's say I want to set right here, and you can see whose towers, whose radios are in that area and the signal strength.
It's like a full spectrum mapper for the spectrum that we're in.
Correct. So so if you get to a point where you're like, let me check, and then you go to a spot and you're like, okay, no one has it and I can put my radio there. Yeah, it's ready to go. And like, okay, this is a good spot. But I always recommend like for an outdoor radio, when I'm planning a trip back to California to install a couple radios in one of my locations, I'm installing 2 indoor radios, and then outside they have it's kind of like a beer garden, but they have like games and stuff.
Yep.
It's maybe 50 feet by 100 feet, and that's all I'm trying to cover. I'm going to put it in one corner, kind of just, blast that one area.
Yep.
If I don't reach the other end, I don't reach the other end, but I'm
but at 100 feet, geez, you should, right?
Correct. So, but just to kind of give you an idea, I was helping someone else out the other day, and he was downstairs and his radio's upstairs, and it was having trouble connecting. So
because it gets stopped by almost everything, if I'm right.
Yeah. So plus it's also 96 people. So it's a concurrent connection. So phones will drop off and on and off. But if that back area has, a couple hundred people, which I think max capacity is like 500, it's not going to serve all 500 people.
Yep. That makes sense. And in fact, when we did the helium meetup here, we did it at, I want to say Stone Brewery down in Liberty Station here in San Diego. and I don't think we were all in an outdoor area. It was all walled in. We were all talking about like, oh, this is like the 5G that we're looking for. Cause I bet they couldn't have had more than 100 people allowed in there. So that's kind of the thing that we're all looking for.
Yeah,
I think.
that's a beautiful place, especially because you're covering that one small area, and you're gonna cover it really well because you're, what, 50 feet away from this radio.
Yeah.
And the furthest, the closest radio to that is hypothetically, say 300 feet
Yep.
on a tower. So yeah, by the time your radio is going to be the one that wins out.
Yep. And when we talk about winning out, is it just coming down to signal strength, or is there something else?
There's more to it, but it's
That's basically it.
Yeah, it's basically pretty much what it is. Like,
Okay.
I know that there's also times where it's like congestion. The tower will start kicking off people, and if your radio is able to pick it up. So, but it's most of the time it's going to be signal strength.
Okay. Cool. That's helpful to understand it. Are there specific, as I've gotten into this 5G thing, I'm seeing, okay, there's this 430i, there's a 430h, there's, I think, a 436, there's a 220 something, like there's a bunch of different radios.
Mhm.
Are there specific radios that you kind of look at and you're like, look, I only deploy these because I've deployed a bunch of them and I know that these 3 or 5 kind of models just work really well for what I'm doing?
So I have, I'm blessed enough to say that I have 37 gateways, and right now I do have about 10 radios. All my radios are indoors, and it's just mainly because, let me rephrase that. I do have a couple outdoors now. I just recently bought them, but my plan is mainly indoors, just because I don't want to push my luck with the carriers. I don't want to fight with them. With that being said, helium does need both indoor and outdoors. So it's not like you're going to be losing out. Like, you're just going to lose out if we do neutral hosts. So for example, if T-Mobile and Verizon sign up, if you have a T-Mobile tower and Verizon tower next to you, you might not get their traffic, but everybody else that isn't on T-Mobile's or Verizon's towers, you're going to move their data. So it's not like you're at a loss, but for me, my goal is, because if Verizon and T-Mobile sign up, that's 200 million devices that can possibly connect with two people.
Big deal.
Yeah, so that's for me, is my risk is, I'm trying to wait for these carriers to join on, and I want to do indoor because I'm not fighting outdoor signal with my indoor radio. But with that being said, I do like the 430. But the 430 does need to, you do have to think about where you're placing it, because you're not going to be, if you're going to put it at your roof line with everybody else's house, it's not going to go that far. But if you're able to get it like 100 feet up in the air and you have a couple radios, you're going to get a good coverage. The 436H is 4 times more powerful than the 430. Excuse me. So you're able to get further reach, but you're also not, you're only, if you have, what's 5,000, I think it's 5,000 for the 436.
Okay,
like
$5,000, yep.
Yeah, so 5,000 for that radio, and you have 96 connections. Yeah, you can get further, but I rather have the ability to have more phones if I'm in an area, right? Because you have 96 on that radio and 96 on the 430. So if I have 2 430s, I'm able to get more people to connect to my radio.
Okay, and that's an important point. I think that a lot of us just are going to miss if we don't pay attention, is that there's only 96 connections per radio at any given time. And we've got to, I'll just say, I've got to stop thinking of like, oh, I'm going to put something on a mountaintop and like crush it. Like, that's not going to work here. It's just going to be, you're just going up against the telcos who have more money, more expertise, more kind of all of the things that matter when it comes to that competition. Right. And really, we're looking for dead space. So to go back to the dead space thing, there's 2 ways to find dead space. One is with an Android phone, right? The way that you had talked about before with the network cell, or whatever the network cell app is. And then the other is there's got to be maps available. And I think I've seen links to them where the carriers are saying, hey, here's where we have coverage. Here's where we need coverage.
Correct. So there's a bunch of different ones that you can look for. Towers, cellmappers.net. So that one is It's kind of similar to what we do, mappers, like LoRa mappers. They have an app and they can drive around, and then it kind of shows like, hey, this is what T-Mobile, Verizon, or AT&T had in that one area.
Yep.
Now it could be old information, so if a tower did get decommissioned or something, it might no longer be there, but it kind of gives you an idea, like this is what the coverage looks like.
It's a place to start. Yeah. And then there's another thing that we just found out. What is it called? Like the rural digital something opportunity, rural digital opportunity grant, something like that.
Mhm.
And those look pretty cool too. And funnily enough, the valley that I fly a paraglider in is totally black. And I think it looks like there's RDOFG grants for that or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, maybe that is an opportunity.
It is. And so there is a use case that a lot of people are like glossing over. They're thinking of like, okay, I'm partially to blame because I'm kind of getting people to kind of think of like neutral host, and being able to offload, Dish and all the big carriers, because that's kind of the easiest way to get DC coming in. We're not creating like a use case like we are with LoRa where you have to build sensors. But there's use cases where you can create a private network for a company, right? So let's say, for example, they need 10 radios. So you go out and buy 10 of the 436Hs, all the gateways, everything that they needed to get it all set up. Let's say you charge that company $100,000. Now that company is like, oh, okay, but that's a lot. But then you can kind of be like, hey, look, you have a lot of bandwidth availability. Let's add one more radio or a couple more radios, maybe like some smaller 430s or whatever. And you can now be like, hey, run your network and subsidize it with carrier offloading. So the carrier is going to pay you as the person to run the network, right? So all your employees who's using phones, all your customers, anybody around your area, if they're moving data, you're getting paid 50 cents a gigabyte, right? So it is offsetting their cost of actually running this network.
Huh. So you would say, let's say, because I mean, this valley that I'm looking at, there's a couple farms there. Is I'd go to the farm and say, let me put up these radios to cover the valley. And then I'm going to recommend that you tell your whatever workers to, to get a Freedom Fi eSIM in their phone, or am I not I'm missing that?
So no, so you go to the farmer and then you say, hey, look, we'll build you a private network and then we'll give you Wi-Fi for whatever, your house. Or you can go to like, hey, a lot of tractors now are like, sending back data.
Yep.
So you can have the tractors connect to the private network, but then at the same time, you're beaming data into the city, and hopefully they pick up some of that signal and be able to offset the cost.
Okay.
Or you can go to the city and be like, hey, look, I want this grant. We'll install, 1,000 of these radios, or hypothetical numbers. Yeah. So we'll do all that. We'll give the city, city employees Freedom Fi eSIM so they can connect their phones to it, like government phones. We can connect all the devices that the government has, because a lot of utility companies also did purchase CBRS spectrum. I think San Diego purchased spectrum.
Okay.
So they want to offload stuff with CBRS. So you can go in there and tell the city like, hey, look, it's going to cost this much to deploy, but you can offset the cost by subsidizing with carrier offloading.
Yep. Okay. Which requires the city of San Diego to say that they would get paid in cryptocurrency. I'm not sure that they're ready for that.
Yeah.
They're freaking out about these people counters. But yeah, I think the general idea is like, yeah, you find a government entity that is on board with that, that's willing to be flexible and be a little bit innovative. And maybe that's San Diego, maybe it isn't. I'll certainly do my level best here, but that's a cool thing. Okay. Are you aware of any FCC discussions about allocating a CBRS style piece to the millimeter wave spectrum? We talked about it a little bit in the beginning. Do you think that'll eventually happen?
No.
Okay.
Money. I think Verizon and T-Mobile spent like $2 billion each just to get licenses.
Okay.
Uh,
We're not
I don't
touching
even see the spectrum of CBRS expanding more, to be honest with you, because the companies that we are like, yeah, we're helping, like telcos a little bit, but they rather own their own spectrum, and they hate sharing.
Right.
So unfortunately, not anytime soon. Maybe in the future, but right now, no.
Okay. Let's see. Let's talk then about kind of deployment opportunities. One of the crew members has a place that overlooks a highway that always has traffic jams during rush hour. Is a CBRS deployment there likely to kind of pick up enough traffic as that literal traffic goes through, or is that like, do they need to be there for a longer period of time in order to make it worth it?
So that one is kind of if they're close enough to actually penetrate the cars, to get into the cars, yes, they could potentially pick up, the traffic.
Yep.
But this one is a little hard because I normally, like a carrier, they will put, their towers near a freeway to pick it up, but
Yep.
it's mainly, that's one of the areas they're covering. That's
Yep.
That's why a tower isn't just facing one direction. That's why a tower has radios all around.
Yep.
So if that person is able to, get multiple radios and have one radio pointed to the highway, probably.
That might be okay. And I think you said that that highway had shitty cell coverage.
Yeah.
Like that spot was kind of a dead spot. And if you've ever driven in any city, you've driven past those like buildings that are right next to the highway. So what are the distance kind of requirements for that then, when you said if they're close enough? I'm imagining you're going to need this 436 because it's more powerful, and you're probably going to need to be within what, like 400 meters, like pretty close.
Yeah. So the 436 usable, so this is all, depending on height and all that stuff. So it is more than just, oh, this is what it is. But if you got some height, you're looking around roughly a mile of usable range. But once you start getting into that mile, you are getting into the lower decibel range. So if there's another tower nearby, once you start getting to about like 119, your phone will switch to a radio that's higher. So yeah, so let me pull up that app once again so you guys can see it. So you'll see so at the bottom right here, these two, if there's towers nearby right now, because it's only picking up the Freedom 5 radio, but these two down here, if it sees another radio nearby that it can connect to, it will tell you. And then once these two are higher than the main one, it will switch. So I've been doing some tests up and down to kind of like mess around with my apartment, and I'm getting about like 60 feet away, and before T-Mobile would technically switch over. So yeah, but with a 436, if you're a couple hundred feet away, you can probably penetrate through the car and actually get the phone signal.
And that's the thing, is that we have to think about, it's got to get into the car as well. Right. It can't just like bounce off the outside of the car. That doesn't count. It's not like horseshoes and hand grenades. Almost doesn't count.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got to be close enough. And then if I'm thinking as just kind of rule of thumb stuff, if I've got a 430, I probably need to be with it. Is there like whether it's feet or meters, is there kind of rule of thumb for like, hey, a 430 will probably get this far, and a 436 will probably get that far in general?
So from what we've been seeing from community members actually mapping their radios, and other people like that are in this board that I'm talking about, but we've tried to mess around with playing with our radios and mapping them to see kind of how far we go. The indoor radios, we've noticed about that 15,000 square foot, that's kind of its max. If you start getting actually even close to that 15,000, and there is a radio that, like let's say you're by a window, there is a chance that the radio itself will switch, because these things are not that, strong. They're only about, they're
200 megahertz, 250 megahertz, or milliwatts. My bad, 250 milliwatts. So is the 430, but the 430 has a 13 dBi antenna, which is far more powerful than the indoor unit.
Yep.
So the indoor unit, you're going to max out around that 15,000 square feet indoors. But then you got the outdoor radio, the 430, which I'm sure even the Mozo Labs one is going to get you about the same distance, is about a quarter of a mile. And then that's like in the neutral host setup, you can probably get a half a mile in the private network. So remember, private network means no other towers are around, and that device can't connect to any of the other towers.
Yep.
So let's say, for example, if they only have the Freedom 5 SIM card, they only can connect to our network.
Yep.
So about a half a mile in that case, where with the 430 or the 436H, you're looking around the 1 mile is your max.
Okay.
You can probably get like 1.5 if it's quite high.
Got it. All right. So and just to put a little bit of a bow on that, 15,000 square feet inside, if I remember that conversation right, it's like a 79-foot diameter. Like, it's not as big a space as it seems.
No, it's not.
Right. So it's kind of 70, 80 feet in any direction. So my little 700 square foot office, we should be covered with the Bobber 500, but for a bigger office, bigger space, parking garage, whatever, it's not going to cover a ton.
Correct. And that's when you want multiple radios. Like, the building that I'm deploying in is about 25,000 square feet, and I'm putting 2 radios, technically a third one. But right now I have 2 radios to spare, so I'm going to put those 2 in there. But then I do have a coffee shop. I do have another coffee shop, which it's kind of like a U shape. So it's just kind of a weird, way. I can't make it bounce to cover everything. So, technically it can do it in one, but I would need 2 just because of how the building layout is.
So you're gonna have to deploy 2, maybe 3 radios in that U shape. That seems like it's pretty expensive, right? If it's whatever, let's say it's $1,500 for an indoor radio, maybe you're getting it for $1,000.
Yeah,
that's still 2 G's plus the Freedom 5 miner plus the actual install cost, the running it, all the rest of it, and then whatever the coffee shop owner wants as their cut. Like, that doesn't seem to me like something, quote, normal people will be like, oh yeah, this seems like a good deal.
Yeah, no. So a lot of people are just going to stick to the one, and it's perfectly fine to stick to the one. There's nothing wrong with, indoors. You're going to cover, especially if you're going to cover the areas where a lot of people are sitting, you'll do just fine. But for me, it's more of I want to cover the people coming in, the people outside.
Yep.
And there's a back area that a lot of people like to sit out because they have like a roll-up door. And so I want to get them because they're sitting out there for a long period of time.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I got this coffee shop that's right down the street from us. Although, funnily enough, they're super hippie, and I don't think they're going to be cool at all with 5G inside. So
the thing is this, like, it's the 5G that a lot of people have the issue with is the higher spectrum. It's the 12 gigahertz. So this is actually between 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz that, if they have Wi-Fi there already, and you go like, hey, look, you have 5 gigahertz already, like, this is not much more than that, because it's 250 milliwatts is pretty much what a residential router is spewing out anyway.
Yep. No, it's a really curious thing. In fact, on Tuesday, you're welcome to jump on the Gristle Crüe. We've got the scientist that I found that did the kind of most publicly findable study on 3.55 gig is coming on to talk to us about what they found in zebrafish, as well as every other kind of piece of literature out there, because we do have questions about that. And you got to answer that for yourself and for the hosts.
I'm sure all this frequencies, no matter what, it's not they're not the greatest for us. But
no. Although the study that I read said that it wasn't, I think, like, if you're growing a baby in it, it's not good for the baby, but for an adult, it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. Minor sensory motor fucking retardation or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I think that's not me being funny. I think that
No. I know what you meant. Yeah. So.
But yeah, so you'll see. But let's stick or not worry about the health stuff for now. What can I use for backhaul if I put this on top of a tall building or a utility pole? Is this something where we can mimic in some way what we did with Laura? Or is it like, nope, you're not going to beam a fast enough signal, basically, or a good enough signal out to a radio?
So this one is something actually we've been working on for over a year now too. So because we do have some use cases where we don't have a backhaul. We're kind of doing an emergency type thing. If all else fails, how do we keep our radio going?
Yep.
And a really good one is similar to like what Wi-Fi DABA is doing. If you have the ability to beam, Ubiquiti sells like these dishes that are pretty much, you point at each other and you can beam Wi-Fi, and you can get some stupid fast rates, like, more than we need for a couple radios. I think I've seen people get like 2.5 gigs transmitting wirelessly long distances, like miles. So that's one way to do it. Starlink is perfectly fine too, if you have the ability to, like, on a building, maybe not on a telephone pole.
Yep.
If you are deploying on a telephone pole, you most likely have the ability to pool some kind of internet. So if you ever notice, nearby one of the 5G tower poles, there's a box inside there is where we have the baseband units and we have all the power transformers and stuff.
Yep.
And in there, we also have a internet connection coming up. Usually it's a fiber connection from, whatever company going up. And then underneath the tower, underneath the street pole, all the way to the top is where we have our radios and antennas.
Dig it. Okay. So I've looked at the Ubiquiti stuff before. I think it's just, now it's a matter of like me finding the specific model and like, hey, here's how to do it. Like, here's the kind of step-by-step is go buy this thing, install it here, do this next thing. But that's called point to point, right? Because we're not going point to multipoint. Okay.
And even cell phone towers, big towers. Like if you go to the middle of nowhere, they're not going to pull a backhaul. They're pretty much, if you see these round dish looking things, next time you see it, you won't miss it. But you see these round, big drum looking things.
Yep.
Those are microwaves, and those are like picking up signal from towers far away.
Yep.
And that's how they have their backhaul. So it's not like we're doing anything, new.
No, it's just new to us.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So Starlink, I've actually looked into Starlink. Starlink is probably one of the ways that I'm pulling, I'm going to be using for some of these emergency deployments.
Yep.
They work perfectly fine. The thing is this, like, a radio can say it has 220 megahertz, right? Or megabits a second, sorry. Getting my things mixed up.
Yep. 220
megabits down. Let's say you have two radios, that's 440, right? Even if the Starlink can't do 440, but it can do 300, it's just going to share 300. It's not really going to matter. You're still going to get the same data. It's just once you start getting to let's say you have two radios and you're starting getting to the 180, connected devices at one time.
Yep.
You're going to start slowing it down, but it's perfectly fine even if you don't have the maximum download or upload.
Yep. Dig it. No, that makes sense, and that's a good enough trail for me for kind of us to follow and figure it out from there. You and I talked a little bit about this, and I think I've got a handle on it. But this whole CPI, the Certified Professional Installer thing, I'm seeing a couple folks saying, "Hey, I got my CPI so that I can install my own radios." But if I'm understanding it right, Freedom Fi right now is acting as the CPI for all of the radio installs that are coming in under them. So all we have to do is kind of the physical installer is send some pictures of the level, inclination, azimuth, that crap.
Correct.
That seems like a super high risk for Freedom Fi to take on, right? Because they're relying on me or some other. I'm not trained by a telco. I'm figuring this thing out, and I'm pretty sure that my install is really good, but could be wrong. Like I don't have any professional training in it. How long do you think that'll last? And then what's the next thing?
I already think they're pretty much trying to find another solution, because I've I have a couple radios that I've been trying to like get on the spectrum, not outdoor radios, indoor radios.
Yep.
So, it's they're already backlogged. There's, they're going to need a lot more people to be able to do this. So I don't see that happening for very much longer. You know, I know that Pollen does allow for people to have their own accounts, put their radios on their own SaaS portals. So at that point, yeah, you will need to be a CPI and be able to onboard it itself. The risk of getting it online and putting it in, like, you don't have to be 100% exact.
Right.
Like, so them taking that risk is not that high.
Oh, really? Okay. I thought it was a bigger deal than it is. No.
Like, well, yeah, so it has to be like within 3 meters, like, so plus minus. It's not like it's huge. So if you tell me, oh, it's 25 feet up, but it's actually 27 feet up, well, yeah, so be it. If it's off like 5 degrees, it's not that going to be that, you don't need to be 100% precise. So that risk is not much. But the problem is, let's say that if someone was to get CPI authorization and get it registered on the account, and then they were putting it on the car, on top of their car with a Starlink or something, and then drive it around, cross country, then we start being, that's negligence on our, whoever did that, and that's illegal. So yeah, I don't know how Freedom Fi is going to handle that.
Interesting. I mean, it seems like the best option is to be like, hey, look, if you're serious about installing these multi-$1,000 radios, you can get a $500 certification and take that on yourself.
Correct.
I mean,
and then you have access. Like, the other thing is too, like, for example, let's say you do an install yourself at, the only time you have available is after hours for the business, right?
Yep.
So let's say that business closes at 7. And so you get there at 8 p.m. And then, by the time you're done your install, it's 10 p.m. And now you're doing your height, your azimuth, your numbers. You don't want to leave there without knowing if that's going to work, right? Like, let's say something happens and it's not working. I'd rather pull up a laptop or a phone, type in my, the radio into the SaaS, and then walk away from it knowing it's working. So,
yeah.
Because then if you have to go back, let's say you do your own install in Arizona. You live in California, you're 7 hours away.
Yep.
It's not like you're going to drive 7 hours again to go, check on it. Like, yep. That's kind of a little bit of a pain.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And you can do it all right away. If you've got your CPI, it all just happens right there because you're certifying it yourself. All right.
Correct.
So that's a kind of $500 well spent. Let's see. I'm just looking at the other questions that I've got. I think that's most of them. If something like Helium Go is developed like Pokemon Go, I think this has been talked about recently. Some indoor locations like doctors' offices won't want random people walking in just a map. Would you, I don't understand this question. Would you tell the powers that be that it would be nice to allow me to disable or hide my radio from such a Helium Go game? Yeah, it sounds kind of weird.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's going to be able to hide.
Okay. And then the last one I've got is how many, like, what's the time limit for it to hand off from one radio to another? Is that measured in seconds? Is that milliseconds?
Milliseconds.
Okay, so that's not something we have to worry about. So it could be, I mean, let's just think of like a thought experiment. You got a highway, maybe not in LA because LA is well covered, but highway in some city where there's like, I don't know, 1,000-meter stretch on the highway that is not covered by any of the majors. There's tons and tons of traffic there, and you've got a building that's right next to that highway, and you can blast it with a 436. Mm-hmm. That might be pretty good because those cars, even if they're only in there for a few seconds, you're going to pick up all that traffic, and there's hundreds of cars going by every time, and there's probably never more than 100 cars in that quote window. So maybe in our little thought experiment, that might be okay to do.
Correct, and that's kind of what I was getting to. Like, it's if you can get the signal, if you can win the phone. Yep. If that phone itself can latch onto that radio,
even if it's, you're playing the game of numbers. And
Right.
so at that point, if you have, again, hypothetically, 100,000 cars running back and forth between that 1,000 meters, right? And you're picking up, 75% of it, 75,000 cars, even if it's moving, only a couple megabits within that small little window, that's a lot of data.
Yeah, from the perspective of your radio, like it doesn't care that it got Sally and Billy and Timmy. It just cares that like, hey, I'm moving. There's basically a constant flow of data in this thought experiment coming through it. Doesn't matter that it's from a million different cars in the course of 24 hours.
Correct. So the thing is, your phone, like, okay, your radio, if it sees the device, like, in its picture and it's moving the data, that's cool. And then it can do 96 at one time, right? So 96 devices.
Yep.
But then as soon as it's gone, a couple milliseconds later, it sees a new device.
Yeah.
So it's continuously just cycling through devices. So it doesn't care.
Right.
If you peg your limit, let's say you have traffic and it's like California, we have 10-lane highways, right? And then with that one area, we have a couple thousand cars, and in your radio's pegged max at a time. That's not a bad thing because you're moving the data.
Yep.
But you're then kind of leaving money on the table per se. You want
Unless
to
you got a bunch of radios. Okay. I think that explores it kind of well enough for people to go from there. Last thing I've got, Dennis, is I put up this indoor radio in Paleo Treats here in San Diego. It's indoors. If that signal spills outside, and I'm not sure how the technical terms for that, but will that get shut down in the SAS? Like if I somehow become too powerful, will it be like, oh, turn that guy off, or not really?
Nope. Because that's the other cool part too, because with category A, you're under the limit for category B. So if it spills out, it doesn't matter. It's just like a Wi-Fi connection. It spills out, it spills out. So
going back to that helium go thing, I don't think a doctor's office is going to have that issue of people just like coming in and going out. No, they're most likely going to be able to pick it up without having to go into this building, unless this building is completely bricks and steel and there's no way that signal is getting out.
Right.
But at that point, yeah, then, maybe someone will go in, but I don't think they'll go in again.
But, your SAS won't turn it off. But if you are an outdoor radio, let's say you're the 436H, right? I call it the Q, but if the SAS says, well, you're not, it's a 1 watt radio. So if the SAS says, I don't want you to transmit at 1 watt, it can tell you to transmit at 250 milliwatts. So you're not more powerful than the 430. But even the 430 can be like, will shut you off. So it's the SAS is pretty much the eye, but outdoor is going to have a lot more limitations than indoor. So I don't think indoors is going to have a lot of issues.
No, I mean, it keeps me coming back to the things that, like, I'm not particularly interested in these deployments, but the best deployments sound like they're going to be indoor kind of beer garden stuff, maybe where there's high footfall, long dwell time, poor current coverage. Like those are typically not found outdoors. Those are like in indoor large spaces.
So that's the risk that we've been talking with a lot of people. Short term with POC, outdoors is going to be the winner, the clear winner. It's hands down. It's going to be easy because there's no walls or windows to someone can just drive by a quarter mile away. Where if they have the indoor, they kind of have to come by the door and kind of like sweep out. So. If you're a mailman that's walking your route and you're walking by these, great. But if you're someone's driving around trying to find a route, outdoor is going to win. But once carrier offloading happens and POC, the more people get the more saturated it gets, less rewards we get. So the other risk is, do carriers come? Right. If carriers come, then indoor long-term is going to work, win, but short-term POC is going to win with outdoor.
Yep. So it's got to be flexible, got to be adaptable, got to be ready to lose it all or maybe win a little bit. So that's just the deal in crypto.
And the thing is this too, like we can deploy now in one location. right? And then we're not in helium, so we can talk about it. If you make your money back on POC,
Mhm.
right? Think about, okay, now let me find another location. Try to play your card on not in the same area, right? Try to expand it. And I know this is the hard part because a lot of people, we wouldn't see 60 or 40 hotspots per hex in big cities because people, if people move them out. But once you start learning, like, okay, this is what we need, kind of start finding locations like further inland, for example, like in your area, try like Palm Springs or something like that,
Yep.
high footfall, but still within close enough to your area. But I don't think something like Palm Springs is going to get as saturated.
Right.
But if you think about it, you have Coachella, Stagecoach, you have a bunch of these big events that happen in that area. So data is needed.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's stuff like that you kind of need to, like, I think once people start making that money rather than putting it in the same area, kind of start to expand out, and then let that area that's going to get, the people that see the money that are coming in for the investment part, they're like, oh, I'm making, $1,000 a day on 5G. Let me go buy a radio. Let that area get saturated, and then you
And
kind of
move
walk
out.
your way.
Interesting. So when we're thinking about it in that way, is if maybe we go back to Laura, is if you're the first couple hotspots in San Diego, you leave it there as long as you're making your 100 HNT a day. This is back in the day. And then as soon as you see the area start getting filled up, you're like, this is going to get saturated. I'm going to take my radio, I'm going to put it in a less saturated place, and I'm going to continue to earning at that relatively higher rate. That's the general strategy you're talking about?
That's exactly what we plan.
Yeah.
So right now we have California. We have I have some in LA. I have a couple in like Orange County. But if you look at where the map is and you see where a lot of these like locations are, like, hotspots, those are usually the most saturated spot.
Yeah.
And one of my hotspot locations that I have my Freedom Fi at, there's like 30 or something LoRa, but there's no 5G. So I'm okay there. But if I'm, from here on, I'm starting to think of Palm Desert. I'm thinking Palm Springs, Coachella Valley. I'm thinking, other states where, or like not states, other cities where there's a lot of footfall, but maybe not where, people are looking to deploy, like LA or something. Because people think, oh, LA is going to be the spot, but big cities are going to be crowded. And going back to that, to the beginning, you're only able to have this amount of, we only have that much of spectrum. If you put 10,000 radios, you have no spectrum.
Right.
And the thing is this, like the last thing, sorry, there's already CBRS deployed. So we don't have this much spectrum to start with. We have that much spectrum because there's already there.
Yep.
So you're not, you don't have the full cake.
Dig it. Well, a lot to think about. Some rad stuff, super helpful. And thanks a ton for coming on. So fucking dog.
Anytime. So
Ripping.
Anytime who has questions. Normally I do feel bad for not being able to jump on Tuesdays, but
you're busy. I get it. Yeah, invitation is always open, so you're always welcome to come by, and I'll collect more questions, and we'll maybe do this again, or maybe do something like a YouTube live so that the greater community also gets part of this. Although eventually I think this will go out and be public to everyone.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions anytime. I'll be happy to hopefully throw out some feelers to see if anybody from the industry wants to join and kind of ask more questions, a little bit more technical. I know right now a lot of people are still just, trying to figure out the basics and kind of get their feet wet. But I know with, I think maybe around September, October, I think enough people have gotten their feet wet that they kind of wanted to know a little bit more advanced. So I think at that point, getting more people a little bit in the industry and kind of people will start to understand, like, okay, this is what, these guys were kind of talking about, and, kind of see what we're talking about in a broader sense, and how to use the network, like I was mentioning earlier, like the smart city technically. And, start making money not only on the offloading but actually offering it as a service.
Brad, love it.
Yeah.
Love it.